And I think with that, I can go ahead and introduce our speaker, who we're so lucky to have today. So Benjamin Stewart works for the German Institute of Development and Sustainability in Bonn, Germany. And he's a researcher and manager of the EU Horizon 2020 Researcher Staff Exchange Project about digitization and sustainable development. This project is called Promoting Research on Digitization in Emerging Powers and Europe towards Sustainable Development. He's currently doing his PhD with Professor Dr. Anna Katharina Hornage at the University of Bonn on knowledge cooperation, and he conducted his master's in global studies at the University of Freiburg. And I will, as Ben is speaking, put some of his recent publications on open science in Indonesia in the chat. And with that, I will pass it over to Ben. Thank you so much, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Natasha, and also thank you, Steph, for the invitation to speak and to be here today. I'm excited to talk to you. This is my PhD work. This is also like the research I do for my work at IDOS, at the German Institute of Development and Sustainability. And I'm always looking for more feedback and an interested community with which to debate these topics and to hear perspectives. That being said, I cannot see anyone, right? Everyone's cameras are off for whatever reason, that's fine. But if you are here, I would ask, would you please in the chat, would you write where you are right now? I am curious where everyone is sitting. Right? I am in Germany. I am in Bonn. All right, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Welcome, Flavio. Germany, Maryland, okay, okay. All right, Darmstadt, Scotland, Germany, location unclear. Excellent. Okay, excellent. This helps a lot. Kind of gives me an idea of where I am speaking to at the moment. I myself, how about I start my presentation, because I also have a little bio at the beginning, and then we can roll right into the actual topic. All right, I will share my screen, and Natasha, I will ask you for some help. Wait, the host disabled participant screen sharing. Is it possible?
Let me see if I can. We should have. Yes, we should have checked this rather than chatting at the beginning of our call.
It's okay. I mean, this is an easy fix if I just send you the presentation as well.
Is this something that Steph needs to fix?
Yeah, I already did it. Try again.
Okay.
Try again? Okay, 1 second. Share screen, and here we go. Excellent. All right. So you should see my presentation, and then I want to start it with my notes.
Great.
So do you see the notes, or do you just see the presentation?
I see the notes.
You see the notes. Okay. We do not want this. All right, and
if you go up to display settings, yeah.
How about this? Do you still see the notes?
Nope, that looks great.
That's great. Okay. That's great for you, but now I will have to look over here. All right. Oh. Okay. So thank you for being here. So my research topic is the regional open science policy implementation. What I will be giving you are snapshots from science and technology regimes in Germany, Indonesia, and Mexico. And so a little bit about me. The introduction was perfect. A little extra information is that this Prodigies project is it's embedded in IDOS's Managing Global Governance network. And this is a network of research and academic and civil society and government institutions between Germany, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, India, China, and Indonesia. And so then Prodigies uses this network, right, to create these research partnerships on the topic of digitalization towards sustainable development. And so I'm also a trainer and facilitator for the Managing Global Governance Academy each year, each fall. It's a 4-month training program in which we bring participants from these countries together to talk about kind of what we would perceive as the most important topics in global governance and sustainable development. And in the past years, open science has become a part of our module when we talk about sustainable digitalization. And again, this is part of my PhD research with the University of Bonn. Although I work in development and international relations, my faculty is the philosophy faculty at the University of Bonn, and I am a sociologist, right? So it's the sociology of development. It's like the sociology of science and technology. And then just as a side thing, I am on the board of an NGO called HOOP, in which we do education, health, and like psychological services for communities in Peru, specifically around the city of Arequipa. These communities that have arisen from kind of a very quick urbanization of the environments in which the cities cannot provide them full infrastructure support, like access to schools and hospitals and so forth. So yeah, I'm a part of a thing here and there. And if you have any questions for me about this background, please do not hesitate to ask. I'm always happy to tell more and also connect you if you are interested in any one of these programs. All right. Next. Yeah, okay. It just takes a second. And then on a personal level, I guess I have come to identify recently as having a life in global affairs. Yes, I was born and raised in the US for the first almost 20 years of my life, but I'm 31 now, and I've spent the last 10 years or so living outside the US. And a lot of that was working, studying, traveling. I've traveled to 46 countries, and I've lived in 12 of them. And this has helped to create a rather global perspective, which then I'm thinking probably created this natural interest in UNESCO and UNESCO's programming, which I was telling our organizers earlier, started with a global citizenship education framework, and then for my PhD work branched out to UNESCO's open science recommendation and its potential for creating and incentivizing science and digital infrastructures as human rights, essentially. All right, and all of these pictures are pictures I have taken. The top one is my home, my parents' home, where I grew up in Pennsylvania. All right. So my research on open science follows this triangle you see on the right. So I'm looking at open science through the lens of the digitalization knowledge nexus, how digital technologies affect the way that we share knowledge in the context of scientific communities, what discourses shape open science implementation, right? And the way that different localities and national settings and regional settings accept or reject or negotiate themselves within the open science and digitalization discourses. And so my research questions, the top two are the driving questions, and then the sub questions are for my papers. So the research question that I'm following is, how do the intersecting discourses of digitalization and open science enable science and technology policy implementation, and where are they challenged by local realities? Right, so it is this question that is driving the 3 papers that I will write for my cumulative dissertation. And then the second question there, where and in what ways do the discourses on digitalization and open science intersect with sustainable development towards the global common good? This is the kind of bigger commentary of my thesis. So the top question drives the sub-questions for the papers, and then after the papers are fully written and submitted for publication, then I tie them all together with the second question, right, and make this commentary on the global common good. So these are the driving forces of the thesis. Okay, and as I said before, I am a sociologist by trade, if I have to be categorized. And so I come from the school of the sociology of knowledge and discourse analysis, right? So yeah, discourse has several schools. I think coming from the US, whenever we think of discourse, we think of the way that we maybe talk to each other, right? We have a discourse. But the school that I come from emanates strongly from Michel Foucault in talking about knowledge and power and the way that norms are created through through laws, so like social settings, power dynamics in just our closest relationships or in our state and citizen relationships, and so forth. And so in particular, I follow the sociology of knowledge approach to discourse, so SKAD. And so SKAD is a framework, a research framework that combines insights from sociology, discourse analysis, and the sociology of knowledge to examine how knowledge is produced, distributed, and legitimized within society. And SKAD it sits on the shoulders of the works of the phenomenologist Edmund Husserl. It is based upon the works of Peter Berger and Thomas Luckmann in their work on the social construction of reality, which is a book that I would recommend to anyone, not just academics. Also, Alfred Schütz's idea of life world, this concept that that helps us to think about the way that we interact with everyday phenomenon and shaping our personal psychologies and sociologies. And then again, building on Michel Foucault's vocabulary for understanding discourse. So he has a whole vocabulary for utterances and statements and dispositifs and laws and structures that create discourse, right, to which we all contribute and then are also shaped by discourses. So open science it has many discourses influencing it, state policy levels, we have digitalization and technology, we have open sharing, we have the whole publication industry and its profit margin, right? That these are all elements shaping a discourse and creating a discourse on open science. And so this is what I am studying, how these are the same and how they differ in different regional settings and what that can tell us about well, I will get into it more here in just a moment. Let me not get ahead of myself. All right, so again, the emphasis here is on power relations, which are understood by analyzing the broader social and historical context of these localized cases that I will show you here in just a moment. All right. So why, right? Why do it like this? I mean, another way to study the implementation of open science would be to say, okay, open science has these pillars, and each of these pillars has these elements. Just go to a place, see, are those elements there? Yes or no? Check, check, and then come back and make your assessment. For something like open science, that one is a very big project and also not one at this stage that is ultimately very, very helpful. Because if my research has shown me anything, it is that for the most part, even within very, very strong and historically sound academic communities, there's not a lot of knowledge on open science. And so people are not sure where to draw the line on something to say, yeah, this is part of open science, or, oh, this is not. And for the most part, whenever speaking about open science, everyone says, you mean open access? Right? So rather, it's about having these conversations that can draw out what the participants know about the topic, right? And how they feel about the topic and what their perspectives are. Because then we can really see the difference between the policy implementation, right? Like the wished for reality, and then the lived experience. And so thus, like, what is missing? Yeah, we find the blockages and barriers to open science implementation. Excuse me, we can identify best practices, and yeah, we can understand how different national and regional regimes engage with science and technology ecosystems. And this tells us something about the context for international cooperation in science and technology, or the lack thereof, right? Yeah, and so then how can we better shape these realities to reflect what we wish for in policy? And then yeah, how do we do this? How do we do a study like this? So using SKAD, SKAD provides a set of qualitative methods to operationalize a discourse study. And this follows qualitative methods, so conducting interviews, often semi-structured interviews. Again, it is not about checking boxes. It is about seeing what is in the mind of the subjects, of the participants. It is about doing participant observation, right? I find this topic compelling because I can, as a scientist and researcher, I can insert myself into other scientific communities and observe as a participant and take my notes and understand the context as much as an outsider can, right? And then, of course, conducting a thorough literature review on the topic, right? And this is especially important for understanding the policies which shape science and technology in local settings and local institutions, and their mission statements, in national settings and their development policy, and how much they financially and rhetorically and actually can contribute to science and technology development, or to R&D, right, in respective countries. And then are there regional cooperation efforts? Are there regional like the European Union has numerous bodies that help to kind of pull Europe together for a scientific and technology-based mission. Yeah. So, and then of course at the global level, you have something like UNESCO proposing a global standard. So it's paying attention to this literature and how it resonates, how they resonate with each other or conflict. Then after conducting the interviews and collecting the data, they are transcribed and coded. And then this particular research uses grounded theory, so that of course I come in with my thoughts and my interests and knowledge and biases, but to the best that I can, I put those aside and see what emerges from the data that I am collecting. And so far, some things have emerged that could have been expected, and then some were rather surprising. And so then shortly, I will talk about the preliminary results of the studies. But first, to talk a moment about the cases. Okay, so as a part of the Prodigies project with IDOS here in Bonn, I have access to research institutes around the world that have contractually signed on to produce research that is open access, and to also produce data sets that are open access. And then we have a system for storing them in a centralized repository, and trying to adhere to many or as many of the open science tenets as possible. And so the cases that I have chosen for my study are Germany, Indonesia, and Mexico as the sort of national bodies. The local cases are the German Institute of Development and Sustainability here in Bonn, the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Jakarta, and then Instituto Mora in Mexico City. And I was able to spend 2 months at Instituto Mora in Mexico City at the end of 2021, and then 2 months in Jakarta just recently from January to March. And then I work here at IDOS. And so it's important to understand that it is not just the institutes that I am looking at. I'm looking at their ecosystems. So I use them as the base and then branch out through their scientific ecosystems, which include universities, which include NGOs and other civil society organizations or like grassroots movements, which include their connections to their regional UNESCO bodies. So then I'm able to, and also of course at their national ministry levels. So I'm able to then conduct interviews at each of these levels. And there's no way to interview everyone at every institute in the country. So again, these are snapshots, right? Snapshots of scientific ecosystems in these contexts. And then why these regions? Well, though Germany, Indonesia, and Mexico are first, I want to say that just I keep saying it, but I want to say it just overtly, is that I think it is important to study this outside of what is called methodological nationalism. So just thinking of like, this is how Germany does it, and this is how Mexico does it, and this is how Indonesia does it. I mean, that is easy because then you have these clear borders and you have the national policies and then you just focus on those. But that is not how our world works, right? We are influenced by our regional partners. We're influenced by these, these international organizations with, global, like a global outlook. We are influenced by different relationships at the local level, which may be intercultural with different interests just at the local level, or like with interests that cross borders, that blur borders. And so it's important that when I'm doing this research, I how do you say, I check or do like a temperature check on like what are the feelings and what are the relationships between the ecosystem that I'm looking at in the country and its partners, right? That was especially important in the Latin American context, where I found out that yes, Mexico has a system for moving towards different open science policies, but it's deeply rooted in regional regional pushes for more open access or more open science policies. It's the same in the German context because it's embedded in the European Union ecosystems. And in Indonesia is another matter, right? So I just wanted to highlight that. So they come from these different ecosystems. They have different science and technology implementation strategies. I chose them. One, it is great to have these different strategies, especially using like open access as as the flagship policy thread to trace these different strategies. So they have different implementation strategies and different reactions to digitalization in the context of their science ecosystems, and yet they still have common partnerships, and yet they still have movements that try to adhere to the tenets described in UNESCO's open science recommendation. So there are points of commonality and then points of differentiation. And so in specific, I mean, I have it written here, but Germany, with this project deal, it made a clear statement about how it wants to approach open science and open access, at least in the short term, by making deals with big international publishing companies. that is of particular interest because it makes a clear statement about what is important. Indonesia caught my interest because it has the highest number of open access journals in the world, at least according to the Directory of Open Access Journals. And I will talk in a moment about what that really means. And then, of course, the Mexican national government has a centralized online repository for all of its publicly funded research, right? Which is not common. All right, so let's go into the preliminary results. And I will do this quickly, just to make sure we have enough time. So Germany, yes, embedded in this European context, it has a very robust scientific history, and it does invest in R&D, and it gives funding for both domestic and international researchers to commit to different projects that adhere to the different German and also European strategies for science and technology. Again, Project Deal is something that we can talk about in another context, unless you have questions now. Germany is in my research so far. So Germany, I have to let you know, is the last case that I need to collect data on. Yes, I live here, but I still have plenty of interviews to conduct with the Leibniz Research Alliance, with Helmholtz, with the German UNESCO Commission. Right, so this is my least researched case, though I live here. But what I know so far is that, yeah, Germany has robust open access and open science movements. I mean, the Berlin Declaration on Open Access was is like a cornerstone of the open access movement that, you know, you can argue birthed the open science movement later on. And yet, something that is clear from the data collected so far is that Germany adheres to the general data protection regulations, which is great for protecting individual personal data and privacy and security. But then it reinforces a hesitancy that I'm trying to fully understand towards using digital platforms and engaging with a lot of technology in scientific context. I mean, as well as just social context, but especially within scientific context. And at least at IDOS and some of its partners, that has hindered their ability to have scientific partnerships, right, with international scientific communities. So yeah, that's something that I'm exploring. So what else has emerged in Indonesia? So as I said, they have the highest number of open access journals in the world. This unfortunately seems so far that it does not come from a particular interest in open access. It comes from the ease with which these types of journals can be created in order to extract resources from scientists, right, who feel this pressure to publish. And this is not purely an Indonesian issue, but it was just highlighted in the different sectors that I talked to in Jakarta and around Indonesia. Secondly, what is positive or optimistic is that recently, in the last 5 years, the Indonesian government consolidated several scientific and education ministries into the National Research and Innovation Agency, BRIN, and that has been politicized, and there are debates about the pros and cons. And is it a power move? Is it, what is it? But besides that, it is there is a strong potential, or there's a conversation about it having potential to centralize an open science regime, right? For BRIN to not only fund research, but to also, have a centralized repository to house publicly funded research and data sets, to index them, and then to even have their own publishing system. It was similar but different to the Open Research Europe model in the European Union, which of course has its like pros and cons. But then this could also help tackle the predatory publishing problem in Indonesia. So that's a conversation that is happening. And then the number one thing that emerged that I did not really consider when I went in to do the research was that digital literacy is perceived to be quite low in Indonesia, and that affects all sectors, especially science. There's a cry for an education, science and technology education that helps people to use their tools, their phones especially, and computers not just as entertainment machines or to support them in the gig economy, but to use them to be critical about the information that they consume, to share, like, researched and fact-based information, and to just invest in creating platforms that help with these scientific enterprises and not just social ones. Again, that's not a purely Indonesian thing, but it was a very prevalent part of the conversations that I did not expect. All right, and then the last case, Mexico. So all of Mexico's publicly funded research, it must be open access. They already have a centralized repository for housing this data, not just the research results, but also the data for the research. How much institutes really adhere to this? I mean, in my research, seemingly quite well. But of course, again, I have a snapshot from this one scientific ecosystem, and the research, these science ecosystems that I'm researching are social science research ecosystems. And so then this is something that I have to talk about more in my thesis, is like, does this make a difference, right? Because I'm not actively researching also natural science research ecosystems, and so is there a difference there? Probably, surely, but then I have to eventually talk about that. And then, yeah, this central repository was quite valuable at the beginning of the pandemic, right? But something else that emerged from Mexico was that at the time, there was this antagonism between scientific communities and the political rhetoric coming from the president. Yeah, and this created always this very impassioned conversation about the value of science and knowledge sharing. And I'm wondering, okay, if there wasn't this antagonism, would there be this passion? So that's another talking point that can contribute to the way that people perceive the value of sharing knowledge. And then lastly, something that emerged is that there seems to be a very strong post-colonial and anti-capitalist sentiment towards the publishing industry in Mexico, and also in this particular Latin American region with their science partners from this ecosystem. And yeah, so they're very much of interest to detach what open science is from the for-profit publishing industry, and thinking that there is no real open science until that happens, until and unless. So those were the preliminary results. And they may seem like disconnected fragments of conversation or feelings and sentiments, but I will use them. So there's a system in SKAD for then dissecting these perspectives and questioning them in a way that ties a thread through them to talk about, okay, how are these discourses shaping the research topic. But then a last point of interest that I would be curious to hear words from you about is that these two enterprises, Library Genesis and Sci-Hub, they came up at every step of the way. Like in Mexico and Indonesia especially, at almost every interview, I didn't bring it up. When the moment you talk about open access, the moment you talk about like knowledge sharing and digitalization, these platforms arise. And if you're not familiar with these platforms, they are online platforms for bypassing paywalls and other barriers, so that in order to access scientific articles, books, I was first introduced to these during my master's. I spent a semester in Buenos Aires, and our professors said, hey, our institution doesn't provide you access to the articles that you need to read for your courses, but here's how you can get them. Yeah, and so then this is part of the power knowledge relationship, right? Is that in Germany so far, these have not been talked about as frequently and as prolifically as in my interviews in the Mexican and Indonesian context. It wasn't explicitly a part of my research, so I'm still trying to figure out what to do with this. So if you have any ideas or insights, I'm very happy to hear them. Right, that's part of why I am here. If you have heard something that you have questions about, or that you find interesting, or that you want to collaborate on, please let me know. Reach out. I'm very happy to work together. So what are my next steps? I conduct more interviews in Germany. I finished transcription and coding. I analyze it following the SKAD principles. I am ready to write the first conceptual paper and have already started. Then the comparative paper comes after that, and then I assess with my supervisor what third paper makes sense in this context to help more easily tie the whole study together. And so I'm always open to ideas about, well, what is a third study that would be compelling? Thank you. I hope that you are still there. I hope I didn't bore you to death and that it made some kind of sense to you. So please, if you have questions, I'm happy to field questions and take comments. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. Particularly, well, when you talked about Indonesia and saying, oh, they have the most open access journals. And of course, my mind immediately goes to that being a really positive thing. And then when you think about the predatory journal aspect.
Exactly. I also thought that. Yeah.
I have some questions, but I want to let the participants ask first. So I'll go ahead and open it up. If anyone has any questions, if you want to use a hand raisey, I will. Martin, I see you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
I mean, something I'm wondering and hearing what you just said. It really seems to me that, talking about open science in a national context, again, just creates obstacles. It does not make things open. I mean, I look at some of the open access policies that funders came up with, and they essentially said, well, if you're an author on this paper, our policy applies, which in an international context is just completely unrealistic. It just doesn't work that way. So has anybody thought about, how what people in Germany, Indonesia, and Mexico are doing actually allows people to do anything beyond a national context?
Hopefully I understand your comment, right? Well, so I have the European model, right, as an example. So for example, for the Prodigies project, which we manage and connect with our partners in these other contexts, if they are a Prodigies partner, whether in Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, or wherever, then they have access to publishing within the Open Research Europe platform, right? So that it has this international connection. Now, does it go the other way? Like, are Germans or other Europeans actively looking at, okay, well, what kind of research community can I get involved in Brazil? I have not yet seen this very much. There are these other sentiments from the research which I thought were particularly interesting, and I have to draw them out, is that in Mexico, the sentiment, and of course I say Mexico while also having spoken to people in other parts of Latin America. But the bulk of my research interviews took place in Mexico. There is this sentiment that we want to make our own system. We are making our own systems, right? We do not necessarily want European or North American models. Whereas in Indonesia, it was said again and again, well, we're behind Europe. We need to catch up. They have these things and we want these things and we need to catch up. These are two different narratives and understandings of what our relationship to each other is.
So, but then that leaves the question, model for whom? So what you said about, this project deal thing is, oh, you have a deal and it applies to German researchers or researchers based in Germany. So, but again, that's not open. Because open means that you have something that has indiscriminate access. And again, you discriminate against. So I see quite some flaw in the principles and in the implementation, and there seem to be quite some contradiction.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the great struggle to find a coherent and inclusive open science system. Because even if these different nations or regions implement policies, then they're still usually with national interests in mind. Yeah, it's a dilemma. I mean, the only thing I could say against that is that perhaps, like with Project Deal, it's less about the individual researchers and more about the German institutions. But yes, of course, there are still German institutions that this deal supports. But if you are an international researcher in the German context, then you have access.
We're back to what Tash said at the beginning, because now all this complexity of a landscape that comes with lots of rules is completely unattractive to any researcher, because that makes life of researchers more difficult. I think the point about open science is really one by giving people opportunities and make it easy to engage and participate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this was so in the policy brief that I wrote for the Indonesian government for BRIN specifically was to regionalize, right? Of course, we are ultimately desiring something global, right? But to regionalize, to open up its scientific community and research funding, and storing data and sharing data. How you can house it in Indonesia if your national interests are so important, but there is the possibility right now to open this up to the regional community. And we talked a lot about the ASEAN context, because Indonesia is holds the presidency of ASEAN this year, so they get to set the agenda for the priorities of conversation for ASEAN. So it could be that, but let's see. I don't know if anyone actually reads these policy briefs, or if I'm just talking to other researchers sometimes, right?
Thank you, Martin. I wanted to, Steffi mentioned, I didn't know if you had anything to respond to with this in the comments about Sci-Hub and LibGen, which I hadn't heard about. I had heard about Sci-Hub, but not Library Genesis, but that they manipulate the usage statistics of subscribing institutions. I don't know if you had anything to weigh in with on that comment.
I mean, so Steffi, if you could elaborate. So I think you are saying just find the articles in through legal channels. This is how I am reading this. Yeah, I mean, I hope it didn't come off that I'm advocating for Sci-Hub and LibGen. I would like to remain more or less neutral. It's that's part of the debate. If these illicit sites provide access to populations that otherwise would not be a part of the conversation, right? They would not have access to the cutting edge of their field. I mean, is it more ethical? Is it more unethical that they access this content illicitly, or is it more unethical that they are already barred from the conversation?